Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Global RPO Panel. This is Lamis Abu Rama with the RPO Association and your host. Hope everyone had a nice long holiday weekend. For our audience in the US, just starting your work week on this Tuesday. Now, registration for this webinar came from all over the world. We have registrations from Argentina, India, France, Australia, UK, Ireland, Singapore, UAE, Mexico, Spain, and so forth. I'm here in Richmond, Virginia, and you'll get to hear from our panelists shortly. They are from all over as well. But we want to hear from you first, our audience on this call. Introduce yourself in the chat, if you will. Tell us where you're calling from. We are using today Zoom webinar, and it might be slightly different than your regular Zoom. So we'll do a quick test here. I want you to open the chat window by clicking on the icon. You know how to do this. Now, before you send your message, notice at the drop down where it says panelists, default to panelists. Select panelists and attendees before you send your message. This way, other participants also get to hear from you. So tell us your name, where you're calling from. We welcome all of you. We would like this webinar to be engaging and informative. Keep your comments and thoughts and questions coming during the discussion. We will have a Q&A session with the panelists at the end of the discussion. And with this quick warm-up, I want to turn it over to today's moderator, Erin Peterson, a great friend of the RPOA, a global consultant, and the host of one of my favorite TA podcast, Big Fish in the Talent Pool. Good morning, Erin, and welcome.
Good morning, Lamise. Very nice to be with you, and thank you for the plug on the Big Fish in the Talent Pool. We are having a lot of fun on that podcast interviewing talent acquisition leaders about all kinds of topics, including RPO. So it's always very interesting to hear their perspective. So thanks very much, and I'm very happy to be here today to moderate the panel of global TA professionals. So if you are comfortable, shall we get started? Okay, so we're going to do a lightning round of introductions. Each of our panelists, we'd love for you to tell us just a brief word about your background, what brings you to the role that you're in today, who are you, what do you do? And then I also would love to hear, what was your first job? I know this is a little bit of a historical reach back, but it can be very interesting to understand, what was our first introduction into the work world as we ourselves now work in the global industry of helping others find jobs. So if we're ready, let's go ahead. Andrew, would you start us out, please?
Of course. Thank you, Erin. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, from wherever in the world you are. So my name is Andrew Brown from Cornerstone. I've been Cornerstone 13 years now. My remit is specifically focused on recruitment outsourcing and has been for the best part of those 13 years. So we have a team of experts that support our recruitment outsourcing clients globally, and our technology helps underpin and underpin the RPO service delivery model, if you like. In terms of my first job, this is completely not relevant to this conversation, but my first ever job was actually a security guard at a local supermarket, which I'm sure many of you wouldn't have guessed. I always envisaged a life in the police force in the UK, and that was a way of sort of gaining some life experience at the time. It was horrendous, and it put me off with the police. But by way of, I think everything happens for a reason. I ended up in a life of tech, which I absolutely love. So, pleasure to be here today. Thank you for letting me be the panelist.
All right. See, it gives a new level of insight into everyone. I found this time after time. Thank you for sharing that. Our next panelist is Aniruddha Kulkarni. Ani?
Hello, everyone. Morning, afternoon, good evening. So I'm most commonly known as Ani, which is much easier to pronounce. And I'm a practice director with Everest Group, which is a research firm which specializes in global services and technologies. At Everest Group, I'm part of the talent acquisition practice, both on the permanent and contingent talent. And at Everest, we have been tracking the global RPO market for more than a decade now. And most recently, I led our study, which is the RPO Peak Metrics 2021, which covers all the major service providers globally within RPO space. I have done many hats in my career, but it started when I joined Oracle as a computer engineer, doing the coding on their HCM, financial, and other modules. When back then I didn't even know what an ERP system actually is. Hated coding, so decided that it's much easier to advise others and research something which I love. And nice to meet you all, and looking forward to a great discussion today.
Thank you, Ani. And I am a particularly big fan of the Peak Report. As an RPO advisor, I refer to it all the time. So thank you for your work on that. I know you're a co-author, and it's a very important information source. So thank you. Okay, moving on to Kathy Auld.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Auld. I'm the Global Product Director for Recruitment Experience Outsourcing, which is our version or flavor of RPO at Pontoon Solutions, which is a global RPO and MSP provider. My background is actually mostly in recruitment technology. So for about 15 years, I've been working in everything from every kind of permanent recruitment software you could think of, including working as employee 11 at the company that literally created the Wikipedia article for recruitment marketing, Smashfly. So I've been working with global organizations and for global organizations for most of my career. And I came to Pontoon a couple years ago and moved into our product role so that I could better integrate technology with our products or our service product offerings. Because we know that technology is key to how we deliver customer and candidate experiences, and both of those are critical to our outcomes. My first paycheck was I had a day off of school and worked at my mom's law firm, and they paid me for one day of copying and filing papers. My first job was at an ice cream shop. It lasted 3 weeks, and I had to quit because it interfered with my ability to play percussion in the school band.
Oh, wow.
My scooping arm just got too tired.
I would imagine you gained some muscle there. That probably were useful in the drumming, actually. But
No,
oh well.
it was too much. The mint chocolate chip was just always too popular and too cold.
Wild. So it teaches us about work, that's for sure. So thank you for sharing that, Kathy. And finally, I'm Erin Peterson. I'm a RPO advisor and talent acquisition consultant with People Results. I draw my experience from Accenture, from Aon, and from Amazon, and really love helping my clients to see around the corner to the extent that we can with regard to TA technology, process, and then RPO relationships. So my first job was actually also in food service. I was the snack bar girl at the local roller rink. I don't know if this translates globally, but roller skating was an activity people did indoors for recreation, and anyways they had to eat, so I was serving food. It gave me a level of respect for the food service industry that I still hold today. All of you who work in that industry, God bless. And it also compelled me to go to college. So that's essentially where and I think early beginnings are important. They start to form us, and how we think about work, how we motivate ourselves. So thank you all for sharing that. I always love that icebreaker. All right, well, so let's jump in. We're going to start out with some data, always important, especially as we consider talent acquisition best practices. And Ani, I think you are going to share with us some key findings from the most recent Everest report, especially the results of the Peak Report and the work that has been done there. Would love for you to give us a perspective on what Everest is finding these days about global RPO.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Harry. Let me, if you could please move to the next slide. Yeah, so I have created few slides just to set the context of this discussion, just to give you some flavor in terms of how the global RPO market looks like currently, and then what we anticipate in terms of both the regional lens as well as the topic for today's discussion, which is truly global RPO. So, if we are to look at the industry as a whole, global RPO market has been growing tremendously well over the last 5 or 6 years, enjoying strong double-digit growth over last 5 or 6 years. 2020, as we know, was a really challenging year for economy as a whole, and we saw that in Q2 and Q3 last year, there were major hiccups along the way. A lot of organizations stopped their hiring completely, right? And because of that, a lot of service providers suffered. We saw complete stop or major drop in permanent hiring. And because of that, the market degrew or shrank close to 11%. But what we have seen from Q4 2020 and what we continue to see in this year as well, that the recovery has well and truly started. Again, the timing of that will be different for different markets because we are at different stages of the second and third waves globally for COVID. But as the economies recover and as organizations move back to the new normal in this post-pandemic world, the RPO industry as a whole is very well placed to benefit from that. So as you can see the figures on the screen, the peak of the RPO market, global RPO market, was $4.6 billion in value in 2019, which became 4.1 billion in 2020. But we anticipate that 2021 will be the year of recovery, where we'll probably reach the levels which we saw back in 2019, as well as for the next 3 to 4 years, we anticipate strong double-digit growth again, as we were seeing before the pandemic. Moving on, so again, when we talk the global RPO market, at Everest, we believe and we classify them into 4 major regional markets, and each market has its specific nuances, specific set of service providers, as well as there are certain market-specific trends which happen in some of those regions. So first and foremost is the North American RPO market. It is the biggest market in the global context. It contributes almost 50% of the market. And as we can see, it was impacted in 2020. Again, Europe, Middle East and Africa, EMEA as a whole also contribute a major part of the global RPO market. And together, North America and EMEA contribute almost 80% of the market if you look at it in dollar terms. Asia Pacific and Latin America are obviously growing in importance. The market sizes are increasing, so obviously they are coming in from a small base. So their growth rates will be obviously comparatively higher to the other more mature markets like North America or EMEA. And what we anticipate over the next few years is that these markets will continue to see major growth, and their share in the overall scheme of things will continue to improve as RPO gains more acceptance in the fast-growing economies like China, India, Brazil, so on and so forth, right? So all of these markets saw degrowth in 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic. All of them were impacted to a different extent, primarily because of their size, primarily also because of the nature of the industries within them, and also given the local differences between how the COVID-19 pandemic played in each of these markets, as well as the restrictions around lockdowns and so on and so forth. Yeah, but we anticipate a strong recovery in 2021 for all of these markets, where they will all again move back to the growth trajectory. And in the context of the global RPO, right, what we at Everest see as a trend is that the RPO deals are becoming increasingly more global. And by global, we mean they consist of more than 2 or more countries. And it can be 2 countries, let's say in same region, for example, a deal which includes US and Canada, or a deal which includes, let's say, UK and France, right? So these deals can be in countries in the same region, or these deals can be, let's say, in countries within different regions, for example, US and UK, or let's say US and India, right? So what we have seen as a trend, and the graph which you see on the left-hand side is our quick analysis from this year's RPO peak metrics, that the among the new deals which we analyzed, the percentage of the deals which included a multi-country component has definitely gone up. So net around 1/4 of the market, or 20%, 25% of the deals which were signed in 2020 had this multi-country or global component. And if you take a look at the graph on the right? So we also analyzed in terms of what was the signing country where this organization was based upon. So, for example, if a organization in North America signed a deal with an RPO provider, which included, let's say, an RPO deal serving both US and Canada, then that was counted under the North America as the signing region, right? So, what we saw as a trend is that obviously North American organizations are leading the trend of uh, adopting truly global multi-country RPO deals, followed closely by EMEA, and then APAC and LATAM still have very low penetration among these kind of deals. And some of it is like very easy to understand as well. So as we know that North America is the uh, powerhouse of the world economy, and majority of the big or Fortune 500 organizations are based out of North America, which are also quite early adopters of the RPO construct, right? So that is why currently North America leads the adoption of these kind of global deals. But we anticipate that increasingly, as the RPO market gets more mature and it receives increased adoption, more and more organizations will try to go for a global construct in their deals. And having said that, just one caveat we would like to add is that in terms of probably the percentage share of the market, these deals will still probably stay close to, let's say, 25 or 30 or 35% maybe, because we have seen increased adoption from first generation buyer as well in 2020. And typically these buyers who are coming in, let's say, from small or mid market, want to start small and want to uh, take that, let's say, one country RPO deal approach first, and then want to scale up things more and more depending on the success of early programs. So we don't anticipate a drastic change in the percentage of multi-country deals per se, but we will continue to see more adoption of global RPO deals over the next years. So, Erin, that is what I had in terms of the market update.
Thank you. Really, really useful. And actually, I have a few things I'd like to clarify, Ani, if we can stick with the data for just another minute, and then we'll get to our panelists' kind of personal experience with the data that you're talking about. So the multi-country RPO, just to clarify, especially the donut graph that you have there, the focus is that in the event that, for example, that 20% slice for EMEA, we're saying 20% of EMEA-based companies have a multi-country. Is that right? So
yeah. So among
reason,
the were signed, let's say, among the deals which were signed in the global RPO context, 20% of them were signed from companies where the primary sponsor of the deal was based out of EMEA. So the buyer organization was based in EMEA.
Good. Okay, so that's helpful, and yet they are purchasing for multiple countries,
Yeah.
and really potentially multiple regions as well. So this does not delineate how far outside of their own country they're going. And your point about North America is that it is to some extent US and Canada, but also if we were to cut the data a little more finely, we would find that many of those North America-based companies are purchasing outside of just their own geographic region. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is 2020 data, which, correct? So
this is based on our latest assessment.
Right. So we might say it sort of belies what might be happening right now, where everybody's recovering. There seems to be a lot of pent up demand. At least that's what I'm hearing from my clients and other RPO executives. And so I know you said you're anticipating 2021 data is going to be significantly increased. Do you have any early inklings on what that percentage increase might be for 2021?
So I won't venture an exact estimate per se, but what we anticipate is that it is again going to be a strong double-digit recovery, and most likely the overall market will again will reach 2019 levels. So whatever decline we saw in 2020 will most likely get compensated for in 2021.
Okay, good, interesting. And okay, and then back to your graph where you were comparing the 4 regions. What stuck out to me quite strongly was the difference between the drop for Asia compared with other regions. So there really was almost no imperceptible or no perceptible drop for Asia like there was for other regions. And so do we have any idea why that is? And I'm talking about the difference between 2019 and 2020.
Yeah, so I think Asia as a whole was impacted less from the COVID first and second wave, at least in 2020. And there are certain economies like China, if you see, right, it was the first one to get impacted, but it was also first one to come out of the lockdowns, right? So as a whole, China saw a lot of economic activity for the almost 3/4 of 2020. And same I think goes for India as well, where we have seen increased deal activity and increased dollar sizes of those deals as well. So again, I think it's a basis of function of how the economy did as a whole, what were the local lockdown restrictions, and what were the individual characteristics of those markets.
Okay, very interesting. And so things took a pause in Asia and then picked up again quite strongly, whereas in other parts of the world we just stopped everything in terms of new deals, and now things are picking up again. Okay, well then thank you for that. And so Kathy and Andrew, I'm very interested to hear from your perspective this pent up demand or resurgence that I was mentioning. Let's start with Kathy. Kathy, what are you seeing in terms of global RPO demand?
You're very busy.
Okay.
So we're definitely seeing that. In fact, I think interestingly, I think that there's an uptick in some markets more than others. So I know APAC was kind of a small portion of that donut slide, but we're seeing a lot of traction in India in particular, a lot of piloting there with a view to moving forward. There's a dramatic escalation of hiring. I don't know if the current situation pandemic wise is going to curb that or what's going to happen there, but I think we've seen a lot of growth there. And interestingly, in some industries last year, we strengthened our impact, which was kind of to be expected because you've got more limited labor markets and you've got people staying home, so you actually need to escalate recruitment as opposed to contract it. But I do think that I don't know if it's pent up demand, but I do think that because companies had to react to the pandemic by, in some cases, downstaffing, reducing their workforce, now the dramatic shift and the escalation of vaccination rates, reevaluating ways of working, it means that in order to scale quickly and flexibly, they're turning to RPO more frequently than they may have previously because they can escalate that more quickly than they can with their internal workforce.
Right. And you're getting at something that I was wondering about. And Andrew, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. Is it possible that the pandemic has helped buyers shift their paradigm and finally kind of get comfortable with outsourcing this very important function, this very personal function that has been held on to for quite a long time by some companies, and they're finally shifting their paradigm in many ways, including considering outsourcing?
Yeah, I think you touched on it perfectly there. I think the pandemic caused a huge amount of uncertainty across recruitment. I think it gives companies the agility, it gives them the flexibility that they wouldn't have if they drove everything internally. I think that in turn is then raising the questions of whether you have local country partners or whether you have one partner globally that you partner with for everything. I think that in turn has seen a shift to this sort of global demand. I also think what's quite interesting is what happened when the world stopped working to a degree. And actually some of the conversations that I thought were really interesting during that time is, contingent labourers were furloughed, or there wasn't a demand for contingent labour. Permanent workforce was frozen. So what was the role of an RPO during that time? And actually there was still a huge demand on an RPO to support in other areas. And one of the big things that there's a number of different conversations that we started to have from a technology perspective, which we hadn't had before. So we talked a couple of years ago around this shift towards sort of total talent, which was one, still very relevant, and we're seeing it more and more in RFPs that we get from a tech provider. But certainly over the last 12 months or so, we've seen a lot more of a focus around learning, which traditionally wasn't there, and this concept of reskilling versus rehiring, which I think is we could probably talk all day about that, because I think there's huge amounts of value to it, but it does move us away from that traditional kind of transactional relationship. And then we're certainly seeing more and more of an uptake or conversation anyway in total talent management as opposed to total talent acquisition. So the tools around underpinning a full life cycle of attraction through to hiring through to firing. I think again that's a really interesting conversation, which seems to be on an upward trend. So I think all of the things that have happened over the last 12 months have led us down a route of actually exploring. One is an RPO, the right way to go from a flexibility perspective? Looks like the answer is yes, and there's not more trust there, but also some of the experience or trust that's been built up over the last 12 months with RPOs is then getting clients saying, okay, well, what more can I demand of my partner there? As I said, learning, reskilling, total talent management. I even heard, I was on a conversation a week or so ago, someone raised the questions of, will an RPO replace a HR department in time? And actually it will all be done through the RPO. And I think that's a super interesting concept. Mm-hmm. And it requires a completely different panel discussion over many more hours to get to the answer. So it's an interesting place to be right now, that's for sure.
Yeah, interesting. And sticking with your point about the expansion of scope or the additional requirements coming from the clients, especially as it relates to technology and partnering between technology providers and RPO providers. Have you seen also an uptick in demand for things like, I guess when you say total talent management, that could include internal recruitment. So identifying who's already in the nest that we can pull over into another area. Yeah.
Internal mobility is absolutely top of everyone's list at the moment. It feels like every conversation we're having is around help me mobilize internally, help me understand what skills I have within the organization. And APJ for me is one of those areas that we talk about a lot when it comes to reskilling, for the jobs of tomorrow, especially in blue collar and, the I suppose the evolution of different roles in that region. So reskilling is really high, but it does feel like there's more of an emphasis placed on RPO to support the internal mobility programs now, whereas before it was perhaps done in-house and sort of under their own rules, if you like. So it certainly is then an interesting conversation around how can tech support and enable that. And it as I said, it's certainly on the rise, those types of conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And I, as far as I know, Cornerstone does offer the capability to, So
I mean, Yes, it does. Yeah.
Insert commercial here, right? But no, I think I mean it's daunting for a talent acquisition leader to figure out what the right technology is that they can be able to use to drive that, because it's not even remotely possible that the human beings on the team are going to be able to sift through all individuals. And so I'd love to talk more about, Kathy, from your perspective, what are clients asking for? Are they looking for this kind of internal mobility driver? Are they looking for conversational AI? Are they looking for, new functionality with their CRMs and ATSs? What are you hearing?
Interestingly, I think that some of the uptick in RPO has it is easier for a company to have an external partner execute their external brand story. So beyond the technology challenges of internal mobility, you really have a real, you have to be more sensitive with an internal audience because of the political nature of internal hiring and internal mobility. From a commercial perspective, it also gives us some challenges there. I think that one of the challenging parts of internal mobility as a part of an RPO is it depends on your scope and your willingness to allow recruiters to reach out to internal folks, because that can be a sensitive topic as well, right? I don't know that we're actually seeing a different technology demand for internal mobility versus everything else, but more and more frequently in our RFPs, the questions are coming up of, what does your technology stack do? How does it integrate with ours? What are you bringing to the table? I think one of the challenges that I see a lot of is there's a lot of, what are you bringing to the table as an RPO vendor, but not how can we integrate and make sure that your technology is fulfilling its its mandate, right? So I do think that there's an expectation that RPO providers will bring tools to the table, but there still isn't the understanding on the customer side that in order to make everything sing and be a completely frictionless process and deliver the best outcomes, there is some true partnership and commitment on both sides that are required.
Yeah. I love the word frictionless, because let's face it, anything that is complex is plenty of friction involved, and that's the goal, is to reduce the friction. So where does that mostly come from in your experience? Is it taking the existing applicant tracking system and trying to integrate everything into it? Because I know there's always those discussions about whether the API is already built and therefore it's a quicker integration, or if we have to build it from scratch. So, or does Pontoon, and in your opinion, best practices in RPO, do you come with your tech stack that already works and essentially say, this is what we're going to use? We're not really going to introduce new tech that the client is asking for. What's the best practice there?
It really depends on customer need. I think that's a really critical thing. Understanding the why behind a customer and what their ecosystem looks like is really critical. So depending on what stack they bring to the table, what portion of the business or what portion of the recruitment they're looking to outsource, bringing our own technologies to the table may be a great option, or we may just bring complementary systems to the table. Interestingly, I've had conversations recently about whether or not customers are specifically asking for this. What are you bringing to the table? We want you to do this for this. We don't want to just outsource our recruitment process or recruitment experience, but also the technology management, technology strategies behind it. And honestly, sometimes the answer is yes to that, but more frequently, customers are requesting outcomes that their existing technology stacks can't deliver, which means that we need to introduce either point solutions that augment their existing backbone strategy, or an entire kit and caboodle, beginning to end, our own software to handle our own outcomes, which gives us maximum flexibility because we can change it whenever we want, or we can change it as needed in partnership with a customer. But I think it's really variable, and so it is a difficult task to know when one is right versus the other. But I think Pontoon does that really well, and it offers customers the flexibility they're looking for, because sometimes they're open to technology solutions, sometimes they want to know about it, but they're really not comfortable with it yet. So by partnering on process, augmenting with point solutions, we can then start a conversation around what additional offerings we can offer or we can provide beyond recruitment process.
Right. Well, I have to say what I have seen change over the last 2 years is really that the tech stack becoming not only the differentiator, but the whole a larger component of the value proposition. So it used to be, we want to reduce costs, therefore we're going to go RPO. Now it's we want to increase capability, and we don't want to have to piecemeal that together with our own internal technology. We want to find a partner who already has the stack that we're looking for, the advanced technologies, and that becomes kind of the primary driver. And oh, by the way, we want to see if we can reduce cost as well. But when you factor in the access to technology, I mean, it really makes a difference in terms of what you're willing to pay, I think, because you're getting not only the process and the people to do the work, but you're getting the technologies to go with it. So it looks like you want to say something. I'll give you an opening here.
I think that the pandemic has definitely shifted. It's forced companies to reevaluate how they operate. Right. I gave a talk a year ago about the opportunities, the opportunities that were going to come out of this, and really it's looking at your culture, looking at your approach to working, be it remote or in place, right? The ways of working for different companies have been challenged over the last year and a half in a way that none of us could have expected. And along with that, the needs of candidates have shifted and changed as well. That's why I think if you look at the labor market, it's not the unemployed, it's the unemployed and those who are working for organizations that want to go back to the way it used to be, but they're not ready for it. And so I think that RPOs allow the opportunity for that flexibility to say, we don't know exactly what strategy we want to take yet, but by bringing in a partner that will both execute process and bring best market technologies to the table, we can then figure out who we are in this new way of working and be able to scale our business up as the needs of the market completely change.
Okay, good. Completely agree. And okay, so moving back over to Ani, quick question for you, Ani. When we think about truly global RPO, one question I didn't get to ask earlier was when we're thinking about organizations that are truly globalizing their recruitment and or ensuring that multi-regions, multi-countries are being served by RPOs. Ani, do you have data yet on whether those deals are being cut with regard to one RPO provider that's going to serve me in multiple regions? Or if I'm a company that is, for example, in Europe and I have a desire to have a solution in multiple regions, am I going to find a provider in each of those regions? So I can still call it global RPO even if I have multiple providers, right? So how is Everest looking at that data?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Eric. Thanks. So the slides which we saw earlier, right, the donut chart, that considers only those global deals where you are outsourcing with only one single provider across multiple countries and multiple regions. So that takes the service provider first view of the data. Obviously, if we take the buyer or enterprise first look at the data, then that share of multi-country RPO deals will be much higher because there will be organizations who have a different RPO partner in, let's say, North America and a different RPO partner, let's say, in EMEA. So that share will be much, much higher. So the data which we saw earlier was specific to only those deals where only one service provider is catering to multiple regions.
Well, that is that's really interesting because you're right. I do believe that the number would be much higher or perhaps if there's a different donut chart that would talk about where there is multiple providers for organizations. Because I think once you've decided to RPO, it starts to beg the question, why not everywhere? Why only in one particular region? But many organizations are not yet convinced that one RPO provider can serve them everywhere. That actually is typically a very long conversation to get to the place where there's going to be that level of trust, risk mitigation, assurance that the local laws and customs are going to be looked after by a provider who's maybe based in another part of the world. So what are you seeing in terms of the responses from the buyers that you are surveying in terms of what keeps them from having one global provider for RPO?
Yeah, definitely. So basically, as you correctly pointed out, there are like some concerns, especially if there are different buying centers which are involved within those buyer organizations, right? So probably each region's buying center or executive sponsor will have a different set of priorities and will have different comfort levels working with different RPO providers. So pre-pandemic, we saw a lot of resistance to actually moving to a truly global model where one service provider is serving all the regions. And but just I think one consequence of this entire exercise for the buyers has been that they are now very closely looking at the risk across the supply chain, and not only in terms of the RPO but also the wider service provider relationships they have with other outsourcing providers, right? And we definitely see that there is more openness to consolidate all their operations across only, let's say, a few providers with truly global capabilities. And I think this resistance or the willingness to actually engage at a global level with a single RPO provider will increase as a result of pandemic.
Right.
This is obviously we have seen across multiple conversations we had over the years with different buyers.
Right. Really important consideration. Let me come back to Andrew. Andrew, sort of following on that question with regard to the complexity of a truly global solution provided by perhaps one RPO provider. How does the RPO deal team or the technology providers of the RPO provider need to think differently when they're designing their solution for a global RPO strategy? How does Cornerstone think about that?
Yeah, so a really good question. I think the first thing is data privacy. How do you take into account all of the different legislations or local laws when it comes to data retention, data privacy, and then you have the applications for roles or talent pools. So being able to cater for those individual local needs is critical. The second thing that we've seen, historically, China has always been an area where you have to host locally. Data held within you need to have data held within China, which then throws up a much more complicated solution because effectively you're having to host in two locations, one outside and one inside, especially if it is a truly global RPO deal. And then we've recently, we're aware of the changes coming into effect in India as well. And again, very similar situation where the data may have to be held locally. We're working through that. That seems to be a target at the moment. We are working through that. And Russia as well. Russia has always been a little bit different in the way that they store data as well. So there is certainly local variances that have to be catered for. I think as a provider, having the ability to scale a solution across multiple regions hosted in one location, but then ensuring that we do have the option in other regions where data has to be held inside is key. It's quite interesting if we look at APJ. A lot of the requests are for data to be held outside of China, unless they're China only. Australia being one now that seems to be certainly an increase in Australian companies who would traditionally be happy to be hosted out, perhaps outside of Asia Pac, now wanting to be hosted inside of Australia. So again, considerations have to be made there. I have to say, we leverage AWS globally, which I think helps our cause. This isn't an advert for AWS by any means, but the fact that we can scale and flex hosting locations pretty quickly is certain. But I think the big thing is the data. Data, those who are catering for those local privacy laws is critical.
Right. So the value proposition only increases when you think process, technology, and somebody to manage all that complexity that you just talked us through, Andrew. If you're a global recruitment leader, you're thinking, oh my goodness, how can I manage all of these pieces and parts and keep track of it and make sure that I'm in compliance? You know, I say this all the time on the podcast. If you're a head of talent acquisition, you need friends. You need lots of friends. And sometimes they come in the form of a technology provider, sometimes in the form of an RPO provider, and sometimes a combination of those two for sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Just going to add, I think that's a really good point. I think from a technology provider that provides solutions into an RPO, we have two things we have to focus on: driving efficiencies into that process. How do we drive efficiencies into a global or localized process, and then compliance. And if we get those two things right, then we're absolutely doing our job.
That's right. Absolutely. And Kathy, let's talk about the elephant in the room: access to recruiter talent. Okay, so this is emerging as a unintended consequence of the pandemic. It seems like this uptick in demand has also created an uptick in demand for the people to do the recruitment work. So how is Pontoon handling that, especially on a global basis?
Well, I think as a global provider with recruitment centers all over the globe, it means that we're able to flexibly recruit and build our staff in multiple different labor markets. So I think this is one thing that really helps us scale quickly, because if we're able to both care for global fineries or global minutia, from a cultural perspective, from a legal perspective across the globe. And we're able to access labor markets where it is easier to find recruitment talent versus harder to find recruitment talent, depending on where you are. I don't know if that answers your question. I think that's probably my
yes, indeed.
There.
Not having them all in one place helps a lot. And then it's
important to global viability for sure.
Yeah, right. And then I think many organizations are facing, maybe for the first time in a while, the buy versus make decision with regard to recruiters, not just other talent in their organizations, but do we grow our own because we can't find enough on the market? And I think RPOs have been doing that for some time, but maybe on steroids right now. Well, we're coming to a time when we want to throw it back to Lamise, but I have one more question for Ani, if possible. Ani, one of my favorite graphics that comes out of Everest is the Peak Report. I know the 2021 Peak Report just came out recently, and I'm very interested for you as one of the co-authors of that to just help us understand, if I'm looking at the Peak Report and I see the image of the far upper right category. So for those of you who are not familiar with this, I don't know if I can show it on my camera or not. It's this wonderful graphic which plots every one of the global and local RPO providers on a scale of market impact and vision and capability. So those that rate most highly on both of those axes end up in what's called the leader or the star performer category. So Ani, I'm just curious to know, what can you tell the audience about what differentiates a leader or star performer RPO from everyone else? And the other categories, by the way, are major competitors and aspirants, I think is what we say, right? Yeah. So nothing wrong with being in those two categories as well. It's all a matter of just identifying. But what really is the differentiator for a leader and a star performer?
So before I jump into that, I just have one small clarification on that. So there are 3 categories: leaders, major contenders, and aspirants. Okay. And star performer is an award which is given to service providers. So it can be in aspirant section, it can be in major contender, or it can be a leader.
Okay,
it just showcases a dramatic improvement that service provider has shown year on year compared to their positioning in last year's peak metrics versus this year's peak metrics. So that's a improvement award which is given to service providers for that specific peak, right? Having said that, I think one major thing which differentiates performers which are in the top half of the peak metrics versus the bottom half of the peak metrics is that, firstly, since it's a global peak, the global capabilities actually differentiate them a lot. Secondly, what we have seen this year is that the more diversification or the more timely investments you are able to make in some of the high growth industries, like let's say technology or healthcare, right? The more protected you were from the impact of pandemic. So unless you had like a very concentrated portfolio in only one sector, like say travel and hospitality, then those were the providers which suffered a lot. And I think these are the service providers who have been also able to look at their operations in an agile way, trying to help their clients actually scale up and scale down their operations as the business needs changes. And last but not the least is the investments in technology, as well as the value-added services like consulting, advisory, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think those were the value adds after the table stakes were met by the all of the service providers. I think that really differentiates the players who performed really well on the peak metrics versus those who are moving there, but still some time off from that.
Very, very helpful. Thank you for that summary. And so I'm not the only one with questions. We actually have some questions from our listeners here. One in particular that I'd like to put out to the panel. How is this is from Swami. How is the uptick in terms of multilingual RPO, meaning hiring non-native English-speaking folks and interviews done in their native language? Is it more on blue collar, or are you seeing that at the white collar level as well? So, Kathy, maybe that's for you.
We're actually seeing it quite a bit, because here's the thing: even if an organization operates with global as its single standard, that isn't going to be viable as you look into candidate markets, and you're not going to get the most efficient outcomes with hiring managers if you don't cater to their needs. So we've invested quite a bit in finding globally friendly solutions that can help drive efficiency by engaging with people in their primary language. It's a crazy thought, but it's actually it can be a challenging, it can present additional challenges when you're trying to bring technologies to the table, because not all of them are equipped to deliver in multiple languages. That's always a question for us, is how can we effectively serve the needs of hiring managers and of candidates using the technologies we have, and we're constantly looking out for new ones that will help us pivot and cater to certain markets based on language needs. Now, hiring non-native, I don't know if you're meaning like hiring in English, but for non-native speakers, I think it's actually both in blue collar and in white collar. Because even, like I said, even if you have a B2B business or a white collar business, you're going to operate more efficiently if you speak with people in their own language. So having globally situated resources, like Pontoon's part of the Adecco group, we're in 62 different countries, and Pontoon recruits in I think 28 or 30 of them. Being able to leverage those experiences and partners within our network is really critical. So if you're looking for a global RPO, thinking about the global reach of not just the business, but their partners as well, their friends, if you will, I think is really critical to make that happen. And I think it's happening across the board. Even though certain languages are becoming ubiquitous and kind of standard for globally operational companies, it isn't the kind of candidate experience or hiring manager experience that our clients want to bring to the table.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up the candidate experience, because that is what it comes down to. Also, the ability for a candidate to feel comfortable that they are able to be articulate. And if I'm speaking a language that's not my native tongue, then I can't always feel like I get the point across. So I think it's definitely a trend. So I'm going back in the questions here. I see one from John. What are you seeing in RPO with respect to staffing agencies? Are you working with staffing firms at all? I'm not sure I totally understand that question. I think it might be more a reference to the MSP relationships, or perhaps organizations outsourcing all of their recruitment, including temp and contractor hiring.
I can offer some perspective here also. So like I said, Pontoon Solutions is part of the Adecco group, which is largely known as a staffing firm. And depending on the country and the culture, the candidate's culture, we may be more likely to escalate to staffing than to be able to place directly. So I think that being a part of that larger Adecco Group ecosystem definitely positions us to be able to succeed globally, because we have the flexibility to work internally and still deliver within the brand without adding and going officially to contingent, if that makes any sense.
Right.
It also speaks to, Andrew was talking about total talent management earlier, upskilling, because we have all those, they're like tools in our belt, right? A whole bunch of additional tools in our belt, which means that we can flexibly operate in like I said, 62 different countries across the globe, both considering candidate needs, hiring manager needs, and the need and ability to get somebody to work, because the every day that a seat is empty is a bad thing for your business, right?
Right.
So I think that their partnership with staffing is really important, because it gives you, like I said, another tool in your belt.
Right. Andrew, what's your perspective on that?
So I'll answer in a slightly different way, because I've certainly seen in the last year to 18 months more staffing firms approach us with a view to acquiring technology to underpin an RPO solution that they're going to market with. So there is definitely an evolution of staffing firms that are either organically doing it without knowing it, or having the ambition to go and deliver RPO programs that want to start the conversation on how do we do it? You know, what tech do we need? How can we help us with the tech that we need to get to market? So there's definitely more and more staffing firms taking that leap now into RPO. Largely, we think, driven by relationships they have with clients who are asking and demanding more of staffing firms. And that sort of takes us back to the original point we were talking about. So again, I think it's a super interesting landscape right now, with the globalization of more and more deals focused on one provider, and those sort of local staffing firms perhaps picking up the more localized, smaller deals at the moment. So that seems to be how it's playing out at the moment.
Very interesting. So a staffing firm can essentially catapult themselves more into the realm of RPO with the use of technology. That's what I'm hearing.
And we've seen it. Yeah, we've got a couple of use cases over the last year or so that proves that. Yeah.
Wow, very exciting. And that might be necessary, because as we've seen, the uptick in demand is really calling on all of us to be resourceful and figure this out on behalf of clients. So panel, thank you very much for your insights. This has been super interesting. I wish we could go on. Honestly, I wish we had more time, because I feel like there's more to discuss, but I know we always are constrained. And Lamise, with that, I'll toss it back over to you.
Absolutely, Erin, and I echo your remarks. Definitely fascinating conversation. Very heavy for just coming back from a break on a Tuesday morning. But I think there is definitely opportunity for us to have more conversations around global RPO. This is probably the first panel the RPO Association hosts on that topic. I expect that we will be hosting more conversations around the global RPO. It's a fascinating area and an area of growth, just like Annie shared with us today. It's going to be a trend going forward. We do want to keep our audience on time. A lot of positive feedback from participants on the very good conversation, excellent conversation there from our panelists. Andrew Brown, thank you so much for joining us today. Kathy, thank you. And Ani Kalkani, and last but not least, Erin Peterson. As always, excellent conversation. I love the depth and the challenge for all panelists and on that conversation. Before we let our audience go, I do have a couple of announcements about upcoming events from the RPO Association. I'll take a minute to share them with you. I hope you can stick with us. First of all, if you are not familiar with the RPO Association, we are a member-driven, mission-driven organization serving the entire global RPO ecosystem and striving to be the place to go for RPO. Our mission is to educate the marketplace about RPO, and we offer many thought leadership programs in collaboration with our association partners. We have 3 on the call today: Cornerstone, People Results, and Everest Group. Thank you for your input and active participation. The RPO Association hosts 3 active blogs. We produce monthly newsletter. We have free resources as well as 2 webinar programs. Our first webinar program is hosted on the 3rd Tuesday of each month. It's the RPO Leadership Forum. Each month we have 1 or 2 RPOA members that share educational content in a 30 webinar format. This month's webinar is on June 15th. I invite you to join us. ADP will be sharing strategies on recruiting in the virtual environment. And then the RPOA expert panel, we host about 3 to 4 panels each year. Global RPO, expect that to be at least an annual conversation that we will have. These are scheduled at irregular times. I invite you to check our upcoming events calendar on the website to see what other events we have, as well as the schedule. All of our webinars are recorded and are available on demand on the RPO Academy on the RPOA website as well. Now, lastly, we also have member engagement events that we are launching all the time. On June 17th, we're actually launching a new event for members, community members of the RPOA. This event is open for all. It'll be just a simple meet and greet, no agenda, for people who joined the organization recently, as well as other community members. We have about 5,000 of those to join us and just get to meet each other. And then we do have forums that are focused on specific audiences. These are invitation-only events. On July 28th, we are launching a new forum specifically for talent acquisition leaders. Our friend Erin Peterson will be facilitating the conversation. Our virtual events currently are 60 to 90 minutes on topics top of mind for that specific audience. August 12th, our forum is for RPO Delivery Leader, now on its 3rd annual occurrence. Lastly, I am excited to announce the date for our 2nd annual RPOA conference. Mark your date, your calendar, October 12th. We will be hosting our 2nd annual conference. More information and registration should open soon. So thank you all very much for being on the call. Thank you to our panelists again. Stay connected, stay engaged, and stay informed by tuning into the RPOA, the place to go for RPOA. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thanks all.